Okay, Ptolemy sent out soldiers. Okay, these guys, this multitude favoured Ptolemy. So this Epiphanes, is it? Epiphanes sent the soldiers out to plunder them without mercy. He also explored the temple and put a stop to the constant practice of offering a daily sacrifice of expiation for 3 years and 6 months. Now Antiochus was not satisfied either with his unexpected taking the city, or with its pillage, or with the great slaughter he had made there, but being overcome with his violent passions, and remembering what he had suffered during the siege, he compelled the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country, and to keep their infants uncircumcised, and to sacrifice swine's flesh, or pig, pork, flesh upon the altar, against which they all opposed themselves, and the most approved among them were put to death, or highly regarded, right? And tormented the worthiest of the inhabitants, man by man, and threatened their city every day with open destruction. Wars 1, 1 and 2. The historical account of this spoiling of the temple in the book of 1 Maccabees reveals a forced cessation of the sacrificial system, or a ceasing, brought about by the erection of an idol of Zeus Olympias beside the bronze altar, and indicates a complete pagan usurpation of the temple complex, including any place original biblical manuscripts might have been stored. On another occasion, an Israelite king who opposed the political position of a biblical prophet destroyed the original manuscript the prophet had written. Before the Babylonian invasion of Judah, the prophet Jeremiah declared that the southern kingdom of Judah would fall to the Babylonians as a divine judgment against the spiritual defection of the royal court and the priesthood. Jeremiah had this prophetic message, the original book of Jeremiah, written on a scroll by his scribe Baruch, and then read publicly in the temple precincts. Shortly thereafter, the Judean king Jehoiakim ordered that the scroll be read to him. The account in Jeremiah 36:23 records what happened next. And it came to pass, when Jehudi had read 3 or 4 columns, the king cut it with a scribe's knife and threw it into the fire that was in the brazier, until all the scroll was consumed in the fire that was in the brazier. Although a second original was composed in the same manner as the first, it was an expansion that included additional words, Jeremiah 36:32. Even so, this incident revealed that the original manuscripts were wantonly destroyed within Israel. When the Babylonians invaded Judah, 605 to 589 BC, and finally burnt the city and the temple, 586 BC, the royal archives in the first temple's library where sacred documents would have been stored suffered destruction. Such a calamity struck Jerusalem again in AD 70 when the Roman 10th Legion invaded and burnt the second temple. These violent devastations of the city of Jerusalem, where any originals of the Old Testament books would have been stored, argue against the preservation of these manuscripts unless the priests were able to remove them before the attack. Maybe somebody snuck out the back door unless they completely surrounded it. There was no way out. Evidence of this is also seen at Qumran, which the Romans invaded and burned in AD 68, and at Masada, where in AD 73 the Romans attacked fleeing Jewish rebels and burned their buildings, because they're highly peed off because these people kept them at bay for a long period, right? Throwing rocks at them and all sorts of stuff, right? So once they got in there, they just basically slaughtered them all, supposedly. Yeah, the Romans attacked fleeing Jewish rebels and burned their buildings, including a synagogue, where the remains of biblical texts were later found. Priests escaping during these wars with items vital to perpetuating Jewish religious practice would most likely have taken them within the best copies of these texts that were easily accessible and legal for use. Okay, we've actually read years ago online somewhere about the story of Masada. They killed everyone, or they committed suicide, but there's only this lady pregnant with a child left, so these Romans had pity on her or something, but they said, okay, you can live on to tell the story of what happened, which could be a completely different story. Okay, the excuse might have been, they all committed suicide, but maybe these Romans, because they're so peed off that, like the was it Romans, when the Mohammedans, Oman went to Jerusalem, and he was talking to this Roman captain there or something. He said, "Hey, it was all the Jews. There's no Jews." And he said, "Oh well, we killed them all in this temple over here. We burnt them, right?" "What?" And he said, "Yeah, because they just wouldn't stop throwing stones." It sounds like a Monty Python film, right? The little buggers wouldn't stop throwing rocks at us, all this sort of stuff, right? So it could have been the same sort of thing. They got pissed off, real pissed off, peed off, and slaughtered them. Because Romans were not very nice. They were pretty cruel, savage. Right? You muck around with them, well, you pay the ultimate price, right? Go in there and mow you down. That could be what actually happened, but of course you've got to have evidence for that, don't you? It's just the idea we had years ago. Okay, so in AD 73, the Romans attacked fleeing Jewish rebels and burned their buildings, including a synagogue, where the remains of biblical texts were later found. So priests escaping during these wars with items vital to perpetuating Jewish religious practice would have most likely have taken them with them the best copies of these texts, and that were easily accessible and legal for use. These may have been hidden away, such as with the Dead Sea Scrolls, with the hope of recovering them in better times. Okay, you've got to prove that some of these scribes, some of these Jews got away, right? Both the Old and New Testaments declare that these destructions of the temple were from God. 2 Kings 23:27, 24:13, Luke 19:43-45. And from a theological perspective, if God allowed the destruction of the originals of His Word, it was because He recognized the copies of His Word as sufficient. Okay. A situation during the time of the early church. Possible mentions of the original manuscripts of the New Testament for at least early copies, may be found in comments made by some of the early church fathers. Tertullian, it's talking about the Roman Catholic Church fathers, those affiliated with that Roman Catholic Church, right? The Roman Imperial Church or State Church, Roman Catholic Church. Tertullian, who was born shortly after the middle of the 2nd century, and who wrote extensively against the various enemies of the church that had arisen, seems to make specific mentions of the continued existence in his day of the original apostolic manuscripts. Those given to the Apostolic Church of the East by Thomas, perhaps? Yeah, apostolic. Disciples, apostles of the Christ. In one treatise against heretics, he writes, because people like Nestorius, the debate against Cyril, came up with the hypostasis, and Cyril didn't like that because he wanted to be bishop of bishops, and he knew that Nestorius was the man, right? So he told all these lies, all this sort of stuff about him. Okay, called him a heretic and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. So because they're not believing what they dictated, what that particular church dictated, then you get called, oh yeah, that's hearsay, that's not true, it's BS, right? So you get labelled a heretic. Apparently in these debates, when they're arguing over scrolls and stuff, these councils or whatever, they get up and punch the other guy in the mouth or something like that, that sort of stuff. A lot of them, when they get called heretics, were beaten and punched in the nose or whatever, that sort of stuff. It's quite funny. Tertullian's defence seeks to make it an indisputable claim. Okay, where are we? Come now, you who would indulge a better curiosity, if you would apply it to the business of your salvation, run over the apostolic churches in which the very thrones of the apostles are still preeminent, in the places in which their own authentic writings are read, uttering the voice and representing the face of each of them severely, on prescription against heretics. 36 emphasis added. Run over the apostolic churches in which the very thrones of the apostles are still preeminent, in the places in which their own authentic writings are read, uttering the voice and representing the face of each of them severely. Tertullian's defence seeks to make an indisputable claim that the Orthodox Church can trace its source to the apostles. he appears to assert that the autographs were still in the possession of the local churches to which they were addressed. However, scholars debate the intended reference of Tertullian's Latin term, and that verifies that he's of the Roman Catholic Church, right? Authentic. Tertullian offered as evidence the apostolic writings being read in the orthodox churches, because at that time there was, prior to Cyril and this debate, the apostolic church was pally with the Roman Catholic Church. It's to a point where at some point in time they decided to break away from it, completely get away from it, according to these priest patriarchs of that particular church today, their records, etc. Tertullian's defence seems to make an indisputable claim that the Orthodox Church can trace its sources to the apostles. He appears to assert that the autographs were still in the possession of the local churches to which they were addressed. However, scholars debate the intended reference of Tertullian's Latin term authentic. Tertullian offered as evidence the apostolic writings being read in the Orthodox churches and indicated that they faithfully represented the apostles' original doctrines. But did he have in mind the Greek originals of the apostles in contrast to the Latin translations, or complete and accurate copies of the originals in contrast to the incomplete and errant copies used by the heretics? In support of his reference being to the autographs is the context. In the previous paragraph, Tertullian had made appeal to the doctrinal system of the Orthodox Church being earlier than all, and evidence of that truth which everywhere occupies the first place. On prescription against heretics, 35. These statements appeal to an original and unbroken connection with apostolic teachings that appear to have as its support the evidence of the original writings mentioned in the following paragraph. However, such a claim could still be made if Tertullian's reference was to copies, correct because they were made from the original, in contrast to those of the heretics, which had been compiled from other sources and altered to fit their own views. Probably the Gnostics, right? Those sort of mystical school, etc. Versions, translations, whatever, right? However, even if he meant the autographs, it is unclear whether they actually existed. The majority of the scholars believe that Tertullian's statement was simply rhetorical, since, as historian Robert Grant observed, he touched upon nothing which he did not exaggerate. Okay. So this person says, right? Yeah. Could be his own perspective, his own view, through his own personal research. Even if the second generation of church leaders, the post-apostolic fathers, did not have access to the autographs, this does not appear to have affected the use of the copies in the church for faith and practice. Interestingly, there are some references to first-generation church leaders when the Apostle John was still alive, consulting him for clarification of what he had written. The implication is not that the meaning of his words was in doubt, but that there was a dispute about which actual words he had written. This indicates that even in the apostolic age, the originals may have disappeared, or that the church only had access to copies. Nevertheless, these copies were what they considered the word of God, and what they used to defend the faith against heretics who claimed for their false gospels inspiration and authority as legitimate scripture. We do know from the way different text types or families of text types developed in different localities, Caesarea in Israel, Alexandria in Egypt, Byzantium in Asia Minor, and Rome, that the originals in those places were replaced by copies, which inherited the traits common to the scribes in these city centres. It must be remembered that until Constantine in the 4th century, the Christian community was persecuted because its religion was illegal, or more precisely, as a late religion it had unprotected status in the eyes of the Roman authorities. Its books could not be legally circulated and were often confiscated and destroyed. 2. The evidence of the palimpsests reveals that older texts were not considered as valuable as newer ones, and therefore could be discarded or reused. Thus, it is possible that the two autographs of the early church suffered destruction. See, the Christians were all good, right? Up until a point where certain senators, certain people of the Roman courts, didn't like the idea that these Christians were doing their own thing, right? The Romans and a few others, suck-ups, basically did the daily bull sacrifices or this sort of stuff, right? Okay. But these other Christians refused to do it and all this sort of stuff. So these people started whining and moaning and carrying on to the Senate or to the emperor and said, they should be persecuted because they're not doing what we're doing, what's required. Yeah, blah, 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 right? So apparently this emperor at the time said, well, shut up, right? Basically leave them alone. There's nothing wrong with them. Okay, they're doing their thing. They're not a problem. But these people kept pushing until they finally got their way. Okay, so it was made illegal in the legal religion. You weren't conforming to the authority, Rome, right? You weren't doing what the Romans were doing. When in Rome, do what the Romans do, etc., etc. These people kept pushing it. So it was illegal for them to gather in, maybe gather in a temple or something like that, or have meetings in temples or in a house or whatever, right? Which they did on the sly. Maybe went out somewhere, meet in caves or something. But you could get persecuted for that. And then along comes maybe Nero, those sort of emperors that, let's chuck them to the lions. Let's use them as candles, according to Fox, Book of Martyrs, all that sort of stuff. Let's feed the hungry lions with these Christians, right? Etc., etc. Okay. So he comes along and he says, no more of that crap, because supposedly he saw a vision of Christ. Put this red cross on your shields or on your uniform, whatever, and you'll invade these other people. You'll be a conqueror in my name and all this sort of stuff. But apparently he had a vision of his goddess, his pagan goddess, because he was like Christian pagan, right? And she said, do this, whatever his goddess was. So he was, basically a Christian pagan, right? Or this sort of stuff. So he made it all legal. And from there, I guess that the Roman the Roman Catholic Church, state church, thrived. Okay, so he goes out and he says, right, you over there, okay, you got to conform to us, to our church, come under our authority, under our boot heel. If you don't, well, we're going to do this to you. Put you to the sword, burn you at the stake, whatever. Take all you got, your woman, your children, whatever. Take all your texts, either burn them or off we go and hide them, right? Never to see the daylight again, all that sort of stuff, right? So this is what he is doing with the Apostolic Church of the East, when they finally, the disciples, Thomas, etc., refused to be under the boot heel of these pagans, in their pagan religion, bull sacrifices, all that sort of stuff. So they refused that name, borrowed from the Greeks, Christian or Christus, right? They're the derogative. These people are slaves to that Christus, so that's what they called them. They called them Christians. So they refused to do that. They said, no. We don't do bull sacrifices. We don't hang out with non-Galileans or Jews or whatever. Okay, we're not going to be like them. So we're not going to take on that name. Okay, we're going to call ourselves Mashiachai, followers of the Mashiach or Mashika, right? Rather than that. We are very kosher. We won't sit with them, won't spend time, don't even talk to them, up until that point where Peter had that vision. And he was told, look, all these animals are being made clean. Take them, eat them, and there's a centurion waiting for you at this certain person's house. He wants to convert to the faith. Oh, no, I don't. I'm kosher, I've never eaten that stuff. And he kept arguing, and he finally agreed to it. And then he's supposed to go meet the centurion. He said, no, we don't spend time with non-Jews, these pagans. No, I'm not going there. Right. He eventually did as he was told, and went there and converted this centurion to the faith, apparently. Okay. Where are we? Okay. We do know from the way different takes types of families, blah blah blah. We already covered that. We have seeing that the originals of the biblical text were written in many cases, certainly true of the New Testament, on perishable materials such as papyrus, palimpsest from the Greek. Did he say palimpsest from the Greek, to rub again, is a manuscript from which the original texts have been erased and a different text written on top of the original writing. Various methods, such as ultraviolet light and new digital imaging techniques, can expose the original text with extreme accuracy. Palimpsests that survive bear witness to what happened to many of the early uncials, the remnants of which have been erased and reused to copy sermons or liturgical texts, would then have been destroyed or discarded once their texts were no longer deemed valuable. Okay, they were written in some cases for a limited audience and not for continued publication and distribution on a wide scale. Suffered conditions, natural and accidental, that contributed to their destruction or loss. It should be further noted that copies of the originals were subject to the same conditions that led to the loss of the autographs. However, as Michelle P. Brown, curator of illuminated manuscripts in the British Library, London, explains, some of those conditions have also preserved the copies for future recovery. Some have remained in ancient monastic libraries or cathedral treasuries since they were written. Others have languished, concealed in desert caves, sealed up in long forgotten rooms, or buried to await resurrection by archaeologists from the ground itself. Many have passed from hand to hand down the centuries and are now preserved in great public libraries, museums and private collections. Since the autographs no longer exist, God having deemed them not necessary for the continuation of his word, this is what this author is saying, he's trying to stress, and nothing remains to us but manuscripts, copies and versions, translations. But what then are these documents that have been preserved against time and carry on as witness to the original Bible? And carry on a witness to the original Bible. In our next two chapters, we will take a tour of these ancient texts. Ooh, sounds interesting. So if you liked this video, it's open up your eyes, give you some insight, and then give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below the video, and then go share this video with all your family, friends, neighbours, church friends and others that you know, that you meet, and come back because we may have a part 3, because this book is really, really exciting and giving us great insight and so forth. We hope that it's doing the same for you.